go. We're live.
Okay. So.
Okay. Well, here, let me. By way of introduction, this is the second video in our ongoing series exploring the quadrant model of reality. So Ryan's going to explain in detail what exactly this is, make it easy for us to understand. We left off. Where did we leave off? We left off kind of exploring the nature of what it is. It's a pattern based on that emerges. Can you maybe right here? Let's put in your words.
Essentially, this, we call it the quadrant model pattern, and this is the pattern out of which reality manifests. I call this form, this quadrant form, the cross form, the form of existence. It seems that being, that existence itself, is produced out of a pattern, which comes out of this form. So I want to do a quick recap of what we talked about before because you couldn't really see what I was talking about. But so far we have, this is the first square of this quadrant, second square, third square, and fourth square. Thinkers, emoters, doers, dreamers. I don't want to go through all of it again, but we talked about how dreaming encompasses these three, and it points to what comes after it. It points to contemplation. And we're going to discuss that in a little bit after we discuss a little bit more of these things. But then contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. This is the first square, second square, third square, fourth square. Now we talked about the physical forces, the forces of physics, strong force, weak force. So this is first square, second square. So this would be thinking, emotion, electromagnetism is doing, gravity is the fourth square, the weird one. And then there's the possible fifth, quintessent. Ow, come on, dog.
Lucky stay.
Lucky stay. So then the gravity points to quintessent, the quintessent force. Right here. Then you have bitter, sweet, first square, second square, third square, sour, umami. Oh, not umami, salty. And then the fifth would be umami. Okay. Then we had the parts of the liver, the left, the right, the caudate, and the quadrant, I guess. And then there's the parts of the heart, the left ventricle, left atrium, right ventricle, right atrium. We talked about just, this is all the cross. We talked about, this is a swastika, and then there's also the different cultures all have this kind of cross symbol. In Egypt, they were very into the kite and the crow. It's kind of like a cross type of symbol. And also, what is it? The ankh is kind of like a cross symbol.
Right. And then I brought up the north, south, east, west kind of, was it? There's like 4 distinct directions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then we talked about the stomach. So the stomach had the 4 parts of cardia, the fundus, the body, and the pylorus. So let's just give a few more examples, a few more quick examples of this. So one would be, I want to point out that there's cavities in your nose. There's 4 cavities. Let's look up what those are really quick. The nose cavities.
So basically what you're saying is that this form is prevalent in biology and all sorts of different systems that have been identified.
Like the paranasal,
in the human body, yeah, and so forth.
Like it's all over. It really is everything. So, but just example, the paranasal cavities or the paranasal sinuses would be, there's a frontal sinus, the sphenoid sinus, the ethmoid, air cells, and the maxillary sinus. All right, and then there's the parts of the spine. So, actually, let's first do the types of teeth. So there's the 4 types of teeth. There's the incisors. Do you know what the incisors are? No,
I think they're the sharp teeth.
Beef? What are these ones?
Well, I was thinking the ones that like canines have, right?
What are these ones?
I
Then?
could be wrong. I'm not sure, but there's
Okay,
like
well it says the incisors.
molars.
The incisors. I don't know the different names of them, but the incisors at the front of the mouth. So yeah, it's these ones.
Oh, okay.
Have a sharp biting surface and are used for cutting or shearing food into small chewable pieces. There are 8 incisors in both primary and permanent dentitions. So this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is these front ones.
All right.
These are the incisor teeth.
Okay. And then
So
what are
that would be the first square.
yeah,
The
right.
second square would be the canines. Are
Oh,
situated
canines. Yeah.
at
That's
the corners of the dental arches. They have sharp pointed biting surfaces. Their function is to grip and tear food. So remember, the second is always kind of like homeostasis and order. And it's talking about how it kind of grips the food.
okay.
There are 4 canine teeth in both primary and so it's these ones. Teeth. These are the vampire teeth.
Right. Those are canines,
The canines.
just like a dog's teeth.
Like dogs. And then the premolars, unlike the incisors and canines, have a flat biting surface. Their function is to tear and crush food.
Yeah.
So I think of the third.
Like leaves and stuff.
Third is the most physical. It's the most material. It's the most matter. I think of matter. It's the doer. The third is the doer.
Okay.
So they are unique to permanent dentition, which has 8 premolars. So there's 8 of them.
And then the molars, right? And what are those?
The molars are the largest. So you remember this is the fourth. The fourth is always kind of different.
Uh-huh.
The molars are the largest of the teeth. They have a large, flat biting surface. The function of the molars is to chew, crush, and grind food. There are 8 molars in the primary dentition and 12 in the permanent dentition.
Right. So the wisdom teeth, right?
Yeah.
Those are the missing 4, the 8 to the 12, right? It's like the 4 kind of extraneous in a sense for a lot of people because they get them removed.
Yeah, they get them removed.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
But is there a fifth?
You
Maybe that's the fifth, huh?
Yeah, there's a possible fifth. Remember, and that would be like the wisdom ones that you get removed.
Right.
Those are the really transcendent ones.
Nobody knows what function those serve.
Yeah, what function do they serve? They're just like
I don't know.
it's weird. But what happened to my pen that I was just holding?
Right
It's
there.
okay. So, but you see the kind of pattern right there. So then there's other things. So for instance, your ear. In my psychology class, I divide the ear into these 4 parts, and I'm not going to get into the 4 parts, but it's the same type of pattern. But then the really strange part is, people don't really understand how hearing works. Honestly, they don't, but they do know the structure. So what they see is at the is it the tympanic membrane? I forget what it's called, but in this one area in the ear, there's these 4 hair cells, and they claim that these 4 hair cells are responsible for all of your hearing. So a sound vibration goes, it shakes up these hair cells. These hair cells, they vibrate, and then they go to your brain, and then your brain interprets them. And somehow this is supposed to be responsible for everything that we hear. But the interesting thing is it takes the same type of pattern. So there's 3 of them which are small. There's 3 small hair cells, and they're lined up like this on the membrane.
It's hard for me to see that.
So there's 3 small ones, and then there's 1 large one. So it's kind of like the same type of pattern. So you have the 3, the duality, the triad, and then you have the 4th one, which is different.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's supposed to be responsible for all of your hearing. So I'm just giving you guys some examples, so you guys kind of are like, whoa, I'm starting to see that maybe you're getting at something here. So
Right.
then another example would be the table of elements.
The periodic table.
The periodic table of elements.
Okay.
So this is in every science classroom. This is like the crucifix. You know how in every church you have the cross,
Right.
even though you're not supposed to have
Idols and
symbols and
Yeah.
everything.
But it's still there.
Yeah. But yeah, it's there anyways. So in in every science classroom, you have the periodic table. Now, it's interesting that the periodic table is such a important structure, and such an important symbol. But the person who came up with the periodic table, he actually came up with it in a dream, and we're gonna discuss the definitions of all these in a second. So that's gonna be important. But he had a dream, and in his dream kind of came up with the structure of the periodic table.
It's interesting because didn't Francis Crick, he credit LSD being under the influence of LSD for discovering the structure of DNA and all that as a double helix, double helical form of DNA.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Possibly.
That you would mention that, Noah, because I know that you would like that.
Well, no, I was just pointing that out because it's a lot of these things that we take for granted as, staples of science they weren't discovered scientifically through the scientific method. They were just sort of like intuited and then
almost everything.
Right.
That's a very good point. I don't want to encourage
discovered scientifically through the scientific method. They were just sort of like intuited and then
almost everything.
Right.
That's a very good point. I don't want to encourage people to do drugs. I've never done drugs in my life, but I didn't, use the scientific method. But nobody has.
Right. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that.
I think it's always ridiculous when I see people, they have this kind of idol of the scientific method, and then they like look at this and they don't realize I've studied every single subject. I've studied everything, and I know how things work, and I know that the way that I've discovered my thing is as legitimate as the way everybody else has. But they have this type of thing where, were you in a laboratory when you discovered this? Like, did you have a test tube?
Yeah, right.
And you're like, well, nobody was when they discovered their things. Einstein wasn't, but that Einstein's just a popular figure that everybody knows, but nobody was. They all come up with it intuitively.
And then they what do you call it? They confirm it through experiments and empirical, through scientific methodologies.
Yes.
So called. Anyway.
So called. But so, all right. So, what was it? What was I talking about? His name was Mendeleev, and he had this dream, and then he came up with the periodic table of elements, and then later he discovered that his dream was correct. He could fill in all the missing elements based off of his dream and everything. So, what it was basically the periodic table is divided into 4 sections. And I'm not an expert on anything. I just know a lot about little bits about everything, kind of. But basically, within every element, there's different orbitals, and with these orbitals, the orbitals are where the electrons are. Now, these orbitals apparently, I'm not sure exactly how to word it, but they call them probability densities or something like that. And so it's basically an orbital, and within this orbital, you have a high probability of the electron being within it.
Yeah, it's like a cloud of probability.
It's a cloud of probability where the electron's very likely to be. So there's different orbitals. There's the s orbital, and this is the s section. With the periodic table, and the s orbital is kind of like a circle. And then there is the p orbital. So s would be the first square, the p would be the second square, and the p orbital. So if you look at this. This is the way that the orbitals look on this computer. So the p orbital is kind of like 2 circles. So you have the s orbital is 1 circle, and then the p orbital is 2 circles. So I think of that as a duality. That's like a perfect duality. You have one circle. It's a binary.
Yeah.
Then you got the third one, the d, and then that's a circle. So this is the triad. It's 2 circles once again. Whoa. Remember, each one builds on the next one. Remember, thinking, emotion builds on thinking, and then doing builds on emotion. Well, this is all built. It's a holistic model. So you find in the later squares what was in the previous squares.
Right. So each square encompasses what the square that came before is.
Pretty much.
That you're saying.
Each square encompasses a square before it. So you have the 2 circles, and then you have this little donut thing with the 2 circles. So we're building up, Now, there's the so this is all the periodic table is describing these orbitals. When you look at that periodic table, this is all it is. Then you have the fourth one. You know, it looks really complicated, but this is all it is, and this is everything is very simple actually. It actually is complex if you don't understand the pattern, but once you know the pattern, you realize, whoa, everything's kind of the same thing. So then you have the F orbital, and the F orbital. Remember, the fourth is always very different. So it's two of these things, two of these little circle things, and then there's two of these little donuts. The two circles and then the two donuts. So it kind of builds on this, but it's a lot different. It's kind of strange, but it's so strange that the S, if you look at the periodic table, there's like this, and then there's the S, P, D, and they're all together. I mean, SPD, yeah, they're all in this part. But the F section has its own section.
That's right.
Because the fourth is always so different, it's separate from the previous three.
Okay.
So, once again, we have this pattern. The first three, very similar. They're all connected. The fourth is similar. It encompasses them.
And the first two are similar too. So the first two are like the most similar.
Yeah.
The third is
most physical. The most
third
matter.
is like it's like it builds on that and expresses it physically, or more physically, I guess. And then there's the fourth, which is what you're saying is it's similar in that it builds on those first three, but there's an element of differentness.
Yes.
Like it doesn't quite fit.
Yes, it doesn't quite fit.
And then you say that it may or may not be like a hypothetical fifth that the fourth points to.
Well, I forgot to mention that, so thanks for reminding me. So there's a possible fifth orbital, and they can draw it out. They think they know what it would look like, and they say that this is really they can only make this fifth orbital if they're in the laboratory, and it's very, very unnatural conditions. But no one's actually ever made it. But they say that there is such thing.
Yeah, hypothetically it exists.
They know it exists.
Okay.
But they haven't made it just because they don't have enough energy to make it. So, once again, the fifth, the transcendent fifth, the G, the God one.
Right, so the fifth is the most transcendent. Like the fourth is sort of transcendent, but the fifth is like ultimate transcendence. And when compared with the others.
Yep.
I think that's what I heard you say. Okay.
Yep.
All
and
right.
the fourth always points to the fifth. So can we get Lucky off me, maybe a little bit? Or is it maybe we should just let him be?
Just let him be, because he's just gonna be rowdy if you kick him off anywhere. So
just so long as he doesn't get excited by my.
Oh, he's not
speaking.
excited. He just he's actually not excited. That's why I haven't told him to move. All right, so moving on. So we sort of established that the others. I think that's what I heard you say. Okay.
Yep.
All
and
right.
the fourth always points to the fifth. So can we get Lucky off me, maybe a little bit? Or is it maybe we should just let him be?
Just let him be, because he's just gonna be rowdy if you kick him off anywhere. So
just so long as he doesn't get excited by my.
Oh, he's not
speaking.
excited. He just he's actually not excited. That's why I haven't told him to move. All right, so moving on. So we sort of established that form, the structure, and the pattern a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, and then I want to mention, even like in your eye, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but there's and I forget the exact names of them, but there's the horizontal cell, the amacrine, the bipolar, and then the ganglion, and then it goes to the brain. So it's kind of like the same type of pattern. There's rods, so there's the rods and the cones, so you have three cones, the red, blue, and green cones, and this is responsible for your vision in your eye. Then you have the fourth, which is a rod, and this is responsible for dark vision. Like so the red, blue, and green sees light stuff. Then you have the fourth. Those are the three cones. Then you have the fourth, which is the rod, and that is responsible for seeing dark stuff, black, in the dark. So you have the same type of pattern within your eye too. The three, which are very similar, and then the fourth, which is different.
Okay, and I think it's worth reiterating. Like, if anybody that's watching this has any comments or questions, like, those are welcome too. That'll help us elaborate where people are interested in seeing this elaborated.
Yeah, and then I just want to emphasize it's the pattern. So the third is always the most physical. So I study the layers of things. So I study the layers of the skin, the layers of the stomach, the layers of stuff like this, and you'll see the same pattern. And whether it's 5 or 6 things, and I'm going to go over the pattern more so you understand it better, but you always see the third thing is the most motor oriented, the doer.
Okay.
Okay, but so let me just give a few more examples that people know about. So the brain, there's the lobes of the brain. The first lobe is the occipital lobe. And this lobe is in the back of your brain right here. And this is responsible for vision. Now, I always think of the first square as light.
Okay.
Just take my word for that for now.
Right, this is a heuristic that you've developed.
It's a heuristic I developed that helps me to better understand the qualities of each square. So then the second square is temporal. The temporal lobe. And that is right here. And this is responsible for hearing, for social things, so for understanding language. It's not responsible for producing language, but it's responsible for understanding language. So the second square we're getting at, it's homeostasis, it's order. It's always the most social. It maintains order. And that's what hearing is. That's the most social of your senses.
So it provides like a foundation or of sorts. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Like
a structure.
Yeah.
It's organization.
Okay.
Without hearing, people are really depressed because they can't really socialize that well. As well. It takes away a lot, apparently, if you can't hear.
Okay.
I don't know.
Right.
Obviously.
Right.
But
right.
Then you have the parietal lobe, and that's right here. And the parietal lobe is responsible for movement, doing things.
Yeah, so motor based.
So this is the doer part, the third square.
Okay.
Then you have the frontal lobe, and it's interesting because the frontal lobe kind of does all of these. There's some visuals parts. There's all of these are encompassed within it, but also it's different. So this is responsible for rational thinking. There's movement stuff, there's stuff like that, but also another very important thing is it's responsible for producing speech. So remember I said the temporal lobe is responsible for hearing and understanding speech, but the frontal lobe is for producing the speech. So if you get an injury in the Wernicke's area, which is in the temporal lobe, then you're not going to be able to understand speech.
But you can still speak.
But you can still speak. But if you get an injury in the frontal lobe, in the Broca's area, you're going to not be able to speak, but you can understand speech. So there's separate compartments. It's a divided structure. Now, so the temporal, I think of the occipital, the first square is light, the temporal is the word, the second square is the word, the third square is the flesh. I always think of it as flesh. So light, word, flesh. And the fourth square, I always think of it as the true word.
The true word. So how does that differentiate between the word? What makes it true?
Well, it's similar to the word in that you see the frontal lobe is a true word, and remember, it's oral. It's the one that I'm producing the speech. It's producing the speech. I think of it as the true word.
Okay.
But the word, the temporal lobe, is the word. It's understanding. It's the social understanding the word.
Okay, so that's a good metaphor, I guess. So the word is just the capacity to understand, and the true word would be the capacity, the capability to produce.
Yeah, and just think that these two are connected as well in this aspect, that they're kind of, you know, without producing speech, how are you going to understand speech? You need to have the producer. You need the one producing the speech, and the one understanding the speech, the one giving the orders, and the one following the orders. So the second square is more following orders.
Right, right.
And then I think of the fifth as the true light. So this
Okay.
is the light, and this is the true light.
So what would be the corresponding brain lobe to?
The fifth
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
I remember someone told me that there's kind of like a fifth type of thing, but there doesn't always have to be a fifth, a sixth, or seventh. But if there is, it's going to fit the pattern.
Okay.
But there isn't always. So for instance with the
So what you're saying is it doesn't matter like what the number of things are.
yes.
What matters is the pattern in which they are expressed.
Yes. That's a very important thing to understand. So, just a couple more examples before we get back to the definitions of thinking, emotion, doing, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's just talk about the phases of matter. So, the phases of matter, we have gas. That's the first square. Liquid. That's the second square. So, I think of gas as like thinking. It's kind of wild. It's a little crazy, going everywhere. Liquid. It's more solid. It's
constrained.
more constrained. Then we have solid. That's the
Solidity.
the material, the physical,
What was the heuristic? The flesh.
the flesh. And then we have plasma. Now, not a lot of people know that. A lot of people think, oh, there's only three, because remember, the fourth is always different. The fourth, a lot of people don't know about the fourth. So, there is a fourth state of matter, though, and that's plasma. So, if you look, states of matter, the four fundamental states: solid, liquid, gas, plasma. Now, I'm not an expert on plasma. I know it has something to do with
Extreme
ionized.
heat or yeah.
What
right.
were you
And
saying?
then the center of the sun or something like that.
Yeah, it's in the sun. It's in the sun. It's in stars because the sun is a star. But it's in the outer atmosphere. But you can't really see that. But it says, like a gas, plasma does not have definite shape or volume. Unlike gases, plasma are electrically conducive, produce magnetic fields and electric currents, and respond strongly to electromagnetic forces. Positively charged nuclei swim in a sea of freely moving, disassociated electrons, similar to the way such charges exist in conductive metal. In fact, it is the electron sea that allows matter in the plasma to conduct electricity. So, basically, though, we have this fourth that's kind of different. So look at this model right here that they have on there. You have the solid, liquid, gas, and they're all kind of connected. Solid, liquid. And then the plasma is kind of different.
Yeah, it's like the periodic table of elements.
It's like
sort of separate. Yeah.
So we're seeing a pattern, and now people are starting to think, whoa, maybe this guy is onto something. And yes, it happens to be the form of existence. So maybe this guy is onto something. And yes, it happens to be the form of existence. So
yeah. Okay.
all right, so now it's kind of interesting, though. So this was a very popular theory back in ancient philosophy. Every culture had this theory where they talked about the four
Humors?
Well, there's the four humors, and every culture kind of had that. And that's the same type of pattern where they would describe that these four humors are responsible for all for your personality.
Right.
Four humors within
They're
your body.
expelled by the body. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm talking about a different one. That was one example of a very popular ancient philosophy. But this was an even more popular ancient philosophy, and this is the four elements.
Right. Right. So, if you've watched Captain Planet, you probably are familiar with that.
If
right?
you've seen Avatar,
Avatar. Okay.
Avatar was a cartoon.
Yeah, the movie, right?
I never really watched too much TV, but I was at my friend's house for a while.
Oh, I see. Yeah, the Last Airbender.
Last Airbender.
You're right. Yeah, I don't think I've seen that, but I know what you're talking about. It's like they control. Everybody controls like one particular
Element.
element. Yeah, and that's
Plus,
how they're known.
there was one last guy who was an airbender, so he can control the air.
Hmm.
But basically, every culture had these four elements. So I'm talking about Egypt, I'm talking about China, Japan, Greece,
And it's what, earth, air, wind, and fire.
Native Americans. Yeah, it's so the first square would be wind or air. The second one is water. And it's kind of interesting because I just found this out randomly. I was just thinking about it. I think of wind as one. It sounds like one. Water, I think of two because there's a T in it and a W, TWO. It's kind of weird. And then the second one is, so there's wind, water, earth. And I think of that as three. There's a TH and the E, three, and the R. So there's wind, water, earth is the third one, and then the fourth one is fire. And I think of that as four because that kind of looks like four, FR. So four. And then, so, but, obviously people say, well, that's not what the ancients said was everything in the universe is made up of these four elements. And a lot of people look at that and they say, well, these guys are primitive. They have no idea what they're talking about. But they did know what they're talking about. What they were saying is there's a pattern in existence. And they were onto the pattern. They somehow their minds were connected to it. But basically wind, the way that Aristotle described wind is he said that there's four qualities that everything has. He said that these qualities are hot and cold, and
Dry and moist.
dry and moist. So he said that air is hot because it rises, and
Thank you.
it's hot because it rises, and it's
Can I give him another bowl?
Sure.
and it's moist because it fills its container. So if you think of air, it's going to fill whatever container it's in, and it's hot because it rises. That's what Aristotle says. Then he said water. Water has these two qualities. He says that water is, and this is important that you guys understand this, is because this is going to help us to understand other things later. So water is
Well, what exactly is important to understand?
how he gets these, because when we
Okay.
study the personality model, we're gonna realize that
We're gonna build that on top of Aristotle. Is that what you're saying? We're gonna use sort of the same
methodology.
right, that Aristotle used the same kind of ordering logic for personality. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's not really personality though. It's MBTI, so it's temperament, and it's distinct from personality, isn't it? Because personality is sort of like the outward expression. It's like it's cultural based, and then temperament is more like inborn, right?
It's temperament,
Yeah.
and
Anyway.
it's also personality.
But anyway, we'll get there in a minute. Let's continue with Aristotle.
So water is cold, and that it doesn't rise; it sinks, according to Aristotle. And it's moist in that it fills its container. So you put water in a cup and it's going to fill the container, so it's moist. Kind of like air is moist. It fills its container. Then you have earth. This is the solid one. Remember the third. Aristotle says that earth is cold in that it sinks like water. It sinks, but it is dry in that it maintains structure. It is solid. It kind of has like it's contained. Has a contained identity. It's sticks together, kind of. It's a solid thing. So that's
So
why
it doesn't fill its container
it doesn't fill its container.
automatically.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And
it doesn't conform to its container.
It doesn't conform to its container.
Yeah.
And that's important. Now
it just sits there in a clump.
Mm-hmm. And then the fire, he said, is hot in that it rises like air. But he says it's also dry in that, yeah, it does move around, but if you look at it, it doesn't necessarily fill its container. It kind of stays in its spot. It looks kind of solid.
And if you try to contain it, it'll go out. Right?
Yeah, it'll go out if you try to contain it.
Because it needs that. It just constantly needs more, to sustain itself.
It's an individual. It looks solid. So basically, when I think of fire, though, I think it has kind of qualities of air, it has qualities of water, and that's kind of always flowing around like shh.
Right.
And it has qualities of earth in that it looks like it's a solid thing. So I think of it as separate, but it contains all of them. And then
it contains elements of all of them. Not really.
Yeah, and then also think about it. Fire can't exist without air. But also water, which is its opposite, will put out fire. But at the same time, Earth will,
Earth can put out fire.
Earth can put out fire, but you see all these. But also, fire kind of needs Earth to be on, in a way. It needs something solid to be on. But what I'm getting at is, this is what the ancient philosophers talk about. They talk about all these need each other, and they all have these qualities that there's antagonistic and I'm not an expert on this, but Aristotle had this logic. How much time have we been doing this so far?
We're about 36 minutes in, so
probably about 50 minutes we'll be done. We can be done, and then we can continue.
Yeah, we're trying to keep this under an hour.
Okay, so
Right.
so basically all these are connected. That's what the ancient philosophers talked about. And he had what is those squares called? Like the squares of complementarity. And it's the same type of thing. It's a quadrant thing, and they use it for logic. And all logic is based off of the quadrant model. I want to just say that before we continue. I want to say that a lot of people think, maybe computers are complex or that things are complex. And they are complex. But they all fulfill the quadrant model pattern. Okay.
So this isn't really, this isn't like a predictive theory in the sense that you can predict like what form like a square should take. It's more like a descriptive theory.
It's a predictive theory too.
It is a predictive
Yeah.
theory. Okay, can you elaborate?
Because
on
nothing can exist without fulfilling this pattern. There's nothing that is important that exists without fulfilling this pattern.
Nothing that is important.
Nothing.
I'm not sure how do you define what's important?
We'll continue with that later, but you'll see.
Okay.
But so another example of this though. So we talked about the different elements with the periodic table. Well, one very important thing is that all life is made up of carbon. Nothing.
I'm not sure how do you define what's important?
We'll continue with that later, but you'll see.
Okay.
But so another example of this though. So we talked about the different elements with the periodic table. Well, one very important thing is that all life is made up of carbon. That's what all life is. Mostly carbon. They call it the miracle element, and they also call silicon the miracle element. But what does carbon look like? Carbon has 4 electrons, and that's what's so special about carbon. It has 4 valence electrons, and that's why it's so many things can connect to it, because it has something connecting to it on all sides. And what it looks like is basically a cross. This is what a carbon molecule looks like. There's the electron, electron, electron. So now, there's another carbon here, and then they all connect to each other, and there's another carbon here. So it's all crosses, it's all quadrants, and that's what makes the carbon so special. Now, there's one other element that's extremely important. Actually, every element that has the 4 valence electrons is extremely important. But the other element that they call the miracle element, along with carbon, is silicon. Now, people will be surprised to find out that silicon is what makes up computers. The Earth basically is a giant ball of silicon. That's pretty much mostly what the Earth is. Sand is silicon. So, you know, you never really have to worry about running out of stuff for computers because you got the whole beach. It's all silicon. You have
And glass.
glass is silicon.
What about like quartz?
Quartz is silicon. You know, all those rocks. You know, like
and they all have special properties too, like
diamonds, all that.
they can tell the time and stuff. They have, I forget what it's called exactly, but they use it in watches, quartz, to keep track of time.
Yeah, so silicon is extremely important. But also silicon looks like a cross. It has the 4 valence electrons. It looks like this. Now, basically, all life is made up of carbon, four elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. That's all life is. If you look at every organism, you're going to find it pretty much is only carbon, and people will be amazed by this. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, right," but that's the way it is. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen make up everything. Now, there is a little bit of phosphorus, like 0.0000, you know, like there's a 0.0s of phosphorus. There's 0.0000, you know, like very, very tiny bit of silicon in humans too. But it mainly is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. And it fits the same type of pattern where, I forget which one it is, but I think it's the nitrogen would be like the 4th one. Because the nitrogen kind of is, there's a lot of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But then nitrogen, it's a little bit less. And then you get the possible 5th phosphorus, but phosphorus is way, way less than even nitrogen. So that's what all life is made up of. Now, I think that that's good for now, and then I'm thinking that what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the quadrant model and discuss these different squares.
Okay.
We're going to discuss this and the definitions, and then we're going to get in. So we have this square, this quadrant, and this quadrant. This is a 3rd quadrant and a 4th quadrant. The physical one and the transcendent one.
Okay.
And after that, we're going to discuss the 1st quadrant and the 2nd quadrant.
All right.
I need to take my phone. Do you guys have my cell phone?
No.
You sure? I can't find it anywhere, honey.
Well,
I don't
we'll
have
take a
it.
look. Let's take a break then, and we'll come back and go over that. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, we're gonna go find a phone. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.